You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the unique nuances of betrayal and healing. It seems like once in a while we get some really heart-wrenching stories. I think all the stories of betrayal are heart-wrenching, but sometimes we get some that really cause us to pause for a minute, and because there is a uniqueness about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, let's just dive right in. The first one says, I was married for 30 years and I didn't understand the depth of my husband's porn addiction until about 8 years ago. He refused to seek help and he recently passed away. I am doing this recovery alone. About 9 months ago, I found him at his place of business, deceased, in front of his computer, masturbating to porn. I have signed up for Betrayal and Beyond. I'm wondering if my situation is unique and if this group has anything that touches on my particular trauma. This is so like you cannot make this stuff up and write it in a movie. This is so horrible what has happened to this woman. And although a husband dying and the spouse finding out more about the addiction or finding out about an addiction or affair after the fact is not very uncommon. We've had several women come forward with that. Um, all of this is unique. Like it's not every day that somebody finds their spouse dead at, I mean, that is like trauma on trauma.
Right.
That's catching your spouse in the act and finding them dead. That is so traumatic. And so yes to Betrayal and Beyond, yes to counseling, and yes to Grief Share. So you can go to Grief Share. I don't know if it's .org. It's grief. Yeah, it is griefshare.org. And look up a Grief Share group in your area or online to just have that space just to process the grief of your marriage and what was happening and the death and all of that. Like you need some experts, and that's a very solid group that you can get involved with. And then with Betrayal and Beyond, it is going to apply because you're going to apply all your answers to what was happening in your marriage. You know, you're going to apply to the patterns and the way that you were manipulated and the way it made you feel. And so it's going to be all really applied to past things to help process that trauma that you experienced. Even if you didn't have a name for it at the time, you probably are able to plug some pieces in now. And then with your group members, you'll be able to connect some dots of your own trauma and make sense and put language to it. And then with anything that's future focused, you can either choose to skip, depending on where you're at in your level of grief and, your situation. You could say this, I'm just going to skip and I'm going to just listen for these questions. Or if you have an idea on what you hoped for, you can put what you hoped for. That's just processing really another loss of grief. Or if you hope to be remarried, then put what you hope to have in the future. So just use those future facing ones uniquely to whatever fits your situation, or just pass. So that's Grief Share, counseling if you're not already in counseling, and Betrayal Beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great recommendations. The other thing that I'm going to offer, which we don't normally do this, but this one is a very unique circumstance. And I know of other women who have had their husbands pass away, not in this exact manner, but have their husbands pass away, and then they discovered more about their husband's addictive behavior, or they discovered other things, and they are pursuing healing. And if you would like to be connected to some of those women, because they're like, I want to help other women who are in this situation, that if you would email us again at unfiltered@puredesire.org, remind us that this was your question, and that yes, you would like to be, your information you would like it to be passed along to these other women who might have a more similar situation. We would be happy to connect you in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Because, our heart just aches for these situations that are just devastation layered. It's already bad enough. And then to put several things together is very, very hard.
Yeah. All right. Our next question says 18 months ago, I learned my husband had a 2-year affair with a woman I considered a close friend. We're healing and I've forgiven him, but I can't move past her betrayal. Why aren't there more resources on forgiving and healing from infidelity when the other woman was also a trusted friend? I would love for this to be a unique situation. And unfortunately, we hear this more often than not. And I know that there are some really great resources out there on forgiveness in general. And I personally think that the chapters in Betrayal and Beyond on forgiveness are really applicable, not only to her husband, but to her friend. And I want to address this in a personally because I've had a situation similar to this one. Not that my husband was having an affair with my friend, but experiencing a betrayal by a friend, which I agree with her that it almost seems like I could work toward forgiveness of my ex-husband. And even today, he and I, we have a great relationship. Our families have a great relationship. It's wonderful. But my friend who betrayed me in a very specific way, I have forgiven her. I don't harbor any ill will toward her. And yet I will never have a relationship with her because of the way that the betrayal took place. And there isn't a lot of information out there specifically. And yet I know in my gut that I'm never going to pursue a relationship with somebody that I don't trust. And and I think that sometimes when we have a girlfriend relationship, that somebody who we're so close with, we share everything with, we share our lives with them, and they betray us at all, it's hard. And it's even hard to explain. It's like, okay, why was it easier for me to, forgive my ex-husband and move forward with that relationship, but not the best friend who betrayed me? And I don't really have a clear answer for why that is, but yet I know the reality of that experience. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's really hard. I completely have never read this book, but it makes me think of the title of the book. The title of the book is Forgiving What You Can't Forget. Um, and it's this hard line of how do we truly forgive, especially if somebody's not really asking for forgiveness, that work that needs to be done. Sometimes I wonder, if it is easier to forgive the spouse because of that whole like we still have to interact. It's right in front of us. We have to still do life with this person if there's kids or we're staying in the relationship or there's grandkids, some kind of interaction that we know we have to somehow get to the point where we can go on and not have this be such a anchor.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody like a friend, as much as it hurts to disconnect, if we're not, co-parenting or having to do life together or staying in a marriage, it's a lot easier to say, I can put that away. I don't have to try to do that. So, it's great that this person is wanting, to lean in and figure out how to process through this. Um, Betrayal and Beyond is going to help you process the betrayal. It is. And I recently met with our friend and colleague, Carol Jurgensen Sheets, who has a new workbook out helping couples heal from infidelity and find love again. And when I was talking with her, she was just talking about some of the nuances and the little differences between somebody who has a compulsive porn addiction and somebody who has an affair. So I don't know if going through Betrayal and Beyond as a group first and then going through something like this as a couple might be helpful to use this couple resource, but I would suggest first going through Betrayal and Beyond so that you can on your own process the betrayal, have your support group, then take a resource where you're partnering with your husband to try to do some deeper level work specifically on this. Um, but I don't, sometimes that affair partner is not going to be a willing participant to try to reconcile or heal. And
Mm-hmm.
so just kind of keep it in the front of your mind that you can do what you can to let things go to God and forgive, but that's it. We can never control how somebody else responds. So
Mm-hmm.
just be aware
Yeah,
of that too.
that's a tough situation.
Yes, it really is. But do you remember we've had a question come in where it was now this affair baby is part of the wife.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that is really facing the reality of what happens when these kinds of affairs take place. So, um, I think it shows a lot of character of the person that's wanting to lean into all of this and
Yep.
really heal fully from it. So,
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Our last question says, my husband has not been officially tested, but we wonder if he is high functioning autistic. In what
mhm.
ways does neurodiversity affect the addict's healing process? Are there practical ways to modify or approach support if this is part of the picture? I love this question. And interestingly, we are getting more and more of this type of
Mhm.
question. And so, um, and I like that. I like that we're bringing this to light and we're bringing awareness um, about adults who are struggling with autism. So, one of my first recommendations would be well, I actually have two. My first one is that on the Pure Desire podcast, we recently did an
Mhm.
episode with Jenna Riemersma and talking about autism and addiction and neurodiversity. And so I would recommend listening to that. We'll drop the number the link in the show notes. And the second one is a book that I'm currently reading called Is This Autism? And it's by Donna. One of the authors is Donna Henderson, and it's excellent. One of the best pieces of it that I find interesting is that it looks at all of the differences in the way that somebody with autism would view the world, and especially when it comes to things like recovery and like being in a group and some of these other elements. And they typically wrap up every single chapter with a perspective from the experts, and the experts are the people who are living with autism and the things that they have learned, and to just again raise awareness. But yes, it actually would it would show up in the healing process, things like having social anxiety. So we say, oh, get into group, this is where you're going to find your healing. That statement can be terrifying for somebody who is autistic or struggling with neurodiversity, or what are some of the other ones? Sometimes the process can be much, much slower for somebody who is autistic. And so then being able to modify the approach to supporting them can be so important. And sometimes even things like when we in Pure Desire curriculum, we tell people that, part of the curriculum or part of the healing process is being in community and being
Mhm.
connected, which requires you to make 3 phone calls every week to group members. Again, something that can be totally terrifying to somebody
Right.
unless we modify that, unless we either allow them to make a recording like Marco, their check-in, and then send it to a group member so that they're not having to like call someone on the phone. The other thing that would work would be giving them a script so that then they don't have to, in the moment, come up with what they're going to say, but we give them a script that says, hi, this is Joe. I'm calling with my check-in. The lowest level on my faster scale is this. And so that then they can just read it. All of
Right.
those kind of things are going to be a great way to help to modify what it looks like for this person to be in recovery and be in that group process. And I'm drawing a blank on more things, but get that book because that's going to be super helpful. Listen to the podcast with Jenna. That's also going to be helpful. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is that we say this over and over and over again that there isn't this process isn't a one size fits all. And so
Mm-hmm.
for somebody who is neurodiverse, for them to be able to say, I want to engage in this process, but this is how it has to look for me. And because of the way that my brain processes the world, I think is wonderful. And I would love to see us embracing more of that as we're learning more about how to really help and support people who are neurodiverse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also good. This can be really this can be hard. It can be a
Mm-hmm.
hard realization because when you enter the process of recovery or healing and you find a good program like Pure Desire, you all of a sudden are flooded with hope. Like we can change. And then for some reason, your recovery and healing and your marriage is not looking the same as everybody else. And when you get a
Yes.
diagnosis of a spectrum disorder, whether that's autism or Asperger's, ADHD, whatever it is, um, it can feel so discouraging because there's an element of these behaviors that are, or motivations or learning empathy that may never actually happen. The closest you might get in some of these areas is them observing or being taught or learning and mocking, mimicking the behaviors of like what am I supposed to do in this situation? What would somebody who has high empathy be doing right now if they saw their wife crying? I should do those things. And so the internal motivation might not necessarily be because they feel it and they feel sorry, but because they've learned that's the right response. And that can be hard as a betrayed spouse who's saying, I don't want to give you a list. I want you to know that you hurt me and I want you to feel sad that you hurt me. And then I want you to do the things to make it right. And sometimes, depending on what the disorder is, that's not going to happen. They are
Mm-hmm.
going to need a list. Like when you see me crying, XYZ. These are the things you have to do. And that really can be a huge loss and grief
Yep.
of something that a betrayed spouse is pursuing, that their husband would understand them and feel for them and understand their pain, and they may not ever get there. And so I would process that grief
Yep.
through joining support groups for people who are on the spectrum, for family members and loved ones of people on the spectrum, that having your own support of others who get it is going to be really important. They may have tips and tricks and encouragement, and that alone could give you wind in your sails. I've seen this in my groups, struggling for years, couples, and then their husbands got mental health help because if we say, okay, you go through group and you're still stuck or you're still doing the same thing over, go to counseling so that it can
Mm-hmm.
be more customized and individual to what you need. And in a couple of those situations, my friends, my group members did, and they had their husband's brain scanned and it showed Asperger's in both, and that the relational part of their brain showed up differently on brain mapping than a neurotypical brain. And
Yep.
so what it did was it was that dual feeling of grief and shock because there is something that's just always going to be a part of our marriage. Like there's parts that aren't going to change. And then relief and hope that now I understand this was not personal. This is something in their brain, the way that they're wired and the way that they behave, and at least it has a name and we have
Yep.
a professional that can help us now. And so it can be hard. I think you gave really good suggestions on resources. But I would say get the support you need. Get support from people who get it and who have family members or loved ones who also have um, the same diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, like we always say, not always the easiest answers, but we hope that helps. And in all situations, whether it's finding your spouse deceased, um, same-sex attraction, neurodivergence, whatever it is, I cannot emphasize divorce, like find that all, go through our material and find that specialty group so you can have support in that area that you feel uniquely you're struggling in or feel uniquely alone in. It's really important to have that support. So, well, thank you so much for joining the conversation and sending in your questions. If you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So please continue to email us with your questions at unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend.